This is Austin Liddy Limits, where authors talk to authors about books and the craft of storytelling. Sponsored by Blue Ink Review, because typing the end is just the beginning. Find out more at blueinkreview.com. While on a trip through the Wyoming wilderness, Dr. Patrick Flint and his son are befriended by a stranger and are forced to deal with a gang of ruthless killers when it turns out the man is not who he claims to be. Stag Party, a reading by Pamela Fagan Hutchins.
So this will be a reading from Stag Party, which is the sixth book in the Patrick Flint series. And this is for Austin Liddy Limits. Just a little bit of setup. Patrick Flint is an adventurous young doctor who finds a way to get himself into trouble, and by extension, his family, and is driven by a strong moral compass that makes that even more probable that it will occur. Meanwhile, to my side over here, we have a fight between a cat and a dog. So there's real life drama going on with this reading. And in Stag Party, Patrick has gone to a ranch where he is testing a horse for his wife, who doesn't want a horse. There's a snowstorm. The owner of the ranch has some sick female sheep, some ewes, and has asked him to give free medical care to the sheep. And he gets on the horse and gets knocked off. So we join him where he's just been um, in ignominiously. Whew, I knew I could say that. I could write that. Dumped in the snow by this horse, and the owner of the ranch is asking for another favor. The cat's providing some mood growling. So here we go. Patrick looked at the matriarch. Rosa held a pitcher in one hand, a bottle of syrup under an arm, and the lead line of the mockingly docile-looking gray horse in her other hand. She raised her voice. I say I call the bunkhouse, and they no answer. I knock. Same. Can you go ask them when they do their jobs? Even yelling into the wind, her words and manner were prim. He understood. Walking into a bunkhouse for men wasn't something he'd wish on most females. Not the mess, the smells, or the possible cursing and nudity. No problem. Want me to come with you, Dad? Perry's face was tight, his eyes cloudy and worried. Patrick wouldn't wish the bunkhouse on his son either. Some things couldn't be unseen, and if the hands were involved in unsavory activities, well, best that it only be Patrick to roust them. Why don't you and Trish get some Gatorade and syrup in those ewes for me? Perry nodded and bounded back toward the barn. Trish eyed Patrick suspiciously. He thought she'd give him an argument, but she just frowned and shook her head at him. See if you can find a plastic syringe so you can squirt it on the back of their tongues. Rosa nodded at Trish. In the metal cabinet. You see it in the barn by the big doors. Okay, thank you. Trish ran to catch up with her brother. Rosa motioned vaguely toward the outline of a long, narrow building past the barn. The bunkhouse. Patrick squinted. He could barely see it through the snowfall. Back in a moment. Holding his side, Patrick leaned into the wind, setting his feet down as carefully as if he was walking on glass. Each step was a painful stab to the ribs. The cold was really getting into his bones, too, and he wished he'd worn heavier outerwear. It took him 3 times as long to reach the building as it should have, 4 times if there'd been no wind. With the muscles in his torso and abdominals clenched as tight as he could knit them, he rapped on the door. The contact of his knuckles on the wood jolted his ribs like a high-speed collision with a concrete wall. He groaned and shivered. More high-speed collisions, a series of them. Gritting his teeth, he settled on a mantra, which he repeated to himself in rhythm with his breaths. Inhale. It's only pain. Exhale. It won't kill you. Inhale. It's only pain. Exhale. It won't kill you. When no one answered after a minute, he tried the door. The knob turned easily in his hand. He raised his voice. Anyone home? The interior was dark and quiet. Rosa, Mrs. Mendoza, sent me to fetch help for some sick youths. He paused. Hello? He took a step backward, at first intending to return to Rosa and let her know the hands weren't home. But he was inside already, along with a musty stink that made him think of wet socks in front of a fire and garbage. He might as well get the complete picture. All he really knew was no one was answering. Someone could be lying in bed ill or hurt, unconscious, or hiding, not wanting to go out in the storm. But first, he needed light. He groped along the wall, searching for a switch plate. He found one, but flinched. It was sticky. In a bunkhouse of bachelors, especially bachelors who worked with livestock, he didn't want to imagine what substance was now on his hand. He flipped the switch upward. No light came on. He felt around for another switch, but found none. Burned out? Great. Now I'll have to find one in another room. Running into furniture in the dark wouldn't be fun with a broken River 3. He put his left hand in front of him, moving it back and forth as he shuffled his feet. He could make out a dim glow in what he assumed was the kitchen. An oven clock? A refrigerator ajar? It gave him a target to aim for. He was making steady progress until his foot bumped into something. Furniture? Maybe, but it didn't feel that solid. He shifted to the left and moved forward. His foot hit the whatever it was again. He reached down in front of him, but didn't find a chair, a couch, a table, or anything except air. Frowning, he pushed the object with his toe. It gave and shifted. He pushed harder, and it rolled away from him. What the heck? Not heavy enough to be a pillow. A rolled carpet, maybe? Sorry, had to turn the page. He definitely needed light. He scooted further to the left until he was around the obstruction and shuffled double time toward the glow. His eyes were adjusting to the gloom. Not much, but enough to confirm he'd found the kitchen and to see the switch plate. He flipped 2 switches to their on position. The kitchen was immediately bright as a summer afternoon. He squeezed his eyes shut, holding his hand up as a shield. Darn fluorescent bulbs. Turning back toward the entrance to the bunkhouse, he craned his neck to see around a wooden dinette table and chairs he'd skirted, looking for whatever he'd bumped into on the floor, but without success. He stepped out of the galley kitchen for a more direct view. The living area he traversed was small. The furniture, a love seat, a threadbare armchair, and the dinette set, dingy. His eyes were drawn to an incongruity beyond them, on the wall by the front door. The switch plate wasn't white like he would have expected, or not much white, as it was nearly completely covered by a dark residue. His mind went to mammalian body fluids brought in by the hands in need of a good washing. Then his eyes returned to the floor and a lump that had blocked his path. Suddenly he wished he had listened to Trish. He'd been wrong to come to the ORM ranch. Suzanne didn't want a horse. He'd busted up his ribs for no reason. And now he was staring at blood pooled near a head of short, sandy brown hair with boot tracks leading straight to Patrick. His eyes cut to his feet. My boot tracks. His medical training kicked in. Time would be of the essence in rendering aid. Patrick hurried toward the prone figure, ignoring the pain from his own injury. He found a young man slayed out, a gaping incision across his throat. He's been attacked. The wound didn't look survivable, and the man's chest wasn't rising and falling. Patrick crouched, gasping, and reached for a wrist. He searched for a pulse. Didn't find one. Kept trying. Eyed the blood on the floor. It was still liquid, but lighter red than fresh blood. The process of coagulation had begun. A thready voice called, "Help me." Patrick nearly fell over in surprise and cringed in pain from the sudden movement. He shot a look at the man, even though the sound seemed to come from someplace else, further in the bunkhouse. It wasn't this man who had spoken. This man was dead. "In here." The words were a barely audible hiss. Patrick dropped the dead man's wrist, stood, and spun in a circle, searching for the source of the voice. "Kitchen." But I didn't see anyone in there. He retraced his tracks. A wide smear of blood, darkened but still wet-looking, led across the tiny kitchen floor to a door, which was open about a quarter of an inch with light seeping out around it. The glow from earlier. A pantry, a laundry room, a hallway? Whatever was behind it, Patrick didn't want to open that door, but he knew he had to. He sucked in a shallow breath and wrenched the knob, pulling outwards to expose a surprisingly deep pantry. A bare bulb with a pull string hung from the ceiling. It illuminated cans of food and bags of rice, beans, sugar, and flour on the shelves, and a long-legged man with a boot missing from one foot slumped against the base of the wall. He held one hand on his bleeding head, hair color indeterminate, the other pressed into his round, oozing gut. Patrick drew in a sharp breath. What had he stumbled into? "I'm here to help you. I'll be right back after I call an ambulance." The man shook his head, revealing broken teeth and what may have been a smile. "Not gonna make it." Patrick squatted to get a closer look at the gut injury. The man's intestines had oozed out around his fingers. What seemed like half his body's blood volume was seeping into gapped wooden floorboards. Patrick couldn't be sure without moving the man's hand, but it looked like he was dealing with another incision in addition to traumatic head injury. Patrick gave the man a 10% chance of survival, only because he toughed it out so far. He said, "Just let me." "He got away." Patrick paused. Part of him wanted to discourage the man from wasting his energy on speech. But this was important information. The man in the other room had been murdered. In a few minutes, this fellow would likely meet the same end. Right now, he was a living witness to a homicide, possibly the only one who could identify a killer. A killer who might attack someone else. Friends, neighbors, wife, his kids. The murderer might even still be on the ranch where he was a current threat. "Who?" Patrick asked. "Man. Dark hair. Dark skin." "Indian?" The Wyoming population was by and large either light-skinned or, if dark-skinned, American Indian. A slight head shake. "Arab." Arab? Patrick didn't know of a single person fitting that description in Johnson County, nor all of northeastern Wyoming for that matter. "A man from the Middle East did this to you." A barely perceptible nod. Then the man's eyes closed. "Stay with me, sir. I'm calling an ambulance." Patrick heard the rattle of the man's last breath before he'd even backed out of the pantry. He was beyond any help that could be summoned, other than through prayer. Still, Patrick found a phone on the kitchen wall and made the emergency call. Then he hurried outside to give Rosa the bad news.
This has been a presentation of Austin Liddy Limits, made possible with help from our good friends at Blue Ink Review, where typing "the end" is just the beginning. Find out more at blueinkreview.com.